They say the oldest secrets are the ones that breathe beneath the floorboards, waiting for someone careless or curious enough to listen. And if you're hearing my voice right now, then you've already stepped onto a path most Americans don't even know exists. Because somewhere between the forgotten highways and the endless woods of this country, there was once a family so deeply woven into the nation's past that their name could never be written, only whispered. A clan erased from every registry, every census, every archive except one. I found that archive by accident. At least, that's what I told myself. It was a box sealed with twine hidden behind a false wall in an abandoned farmhouse in Western Virginia. The building was slated for demolition. The crew hadn't gone inside. They said the house had a smell to it, like dirt and iron and something older than rot. I should have walked away. But the moment I pulled that box from the darkness, I felt something heavy settle in my chest, as though the air itself was warning me not to open it. Inside were records, handwritten, faded, some in ink, some in charcoal. Dozens of pages, but all with the same symbol pressed into the corner, a circle interrupted by 3 downward slashes. It looked like a broken sun, and every document, every note, every confession mentioned the same name, the Holloway Clan. You won't find them in any book. No historian will discuss them. No museum will display their artifacts. And yet, once you start reading, a disturbing truth becomes clear. The Holloways shaped more of America than the families whose portraits hang in government halls. Not through power, not through wealth, but through fear. Generations of them lived secluded in the interior valleys of Appalachia, far from prying eyes. They married only within the clan. They enforced silence the way other families enforce curfews. Outsiders who stumbled onto their land never left with the same memories they arrived with, if they left at all. And the strangest part, every record claims they believed they were protecting the country, guarding it from something they called the returning, a threat no one else seems to acknowledge. A threat they swore was real enough to spill blood for. What frightened me most wasn't how they lived. It was what they believed was coming. And now, after reading their archives, I'm starting to wonder if they were right. When you trace the Holloway lineage backward through the scraps they left behind, you begin to notice a pattern, an unsettling rhythm to their existence, as though their entire bloodline pulsed to something buried beneath the surface of American history. Their earliest records date back to the mid-1700s, long before the Revolutionary War, long before the frontier had even been properly mapped. They weren't pioneers, they weren't settlers. They were already here deep in the forested interior, living by rules not found in any other community of the time. Most families kept Bibles. The Holloways kept journals. Thick ones, bound in animal hide and stitched with twine, written in handwriting that seemed to deteriorate with each generation, as if their minds were unraveling slowly over the decades. The earliest entries are almost hopeful. Descriptions of land surveying, hunting routes, medicinal herbs. But then the tone changes. Abruptly, our pages become warnings, commands, ritualistic reminders written like they were meant for children who were never allowed to forget. Never go above the ridge after dusk. Never follow the hollow wind. If the door knocks twice, do not answer until morning. And always, at the bottom of every entry, keep the returning away. The clan grew larger as the years passed, but the world around them expanded faster. Railroads carved through the mountains, telegraph lines hummed overhead, cities swelled on the horizons. By the mid-1800s, America was roaring forward, and yet the Holloways remained frozen in their pocket of untouched soil. Outsiders tried to map the region, but surveyors complained their compasses spun without reason. Travelers swore the woods seemed to rearrange themselves. People started avoiding the valley altogether. That suited the Holloways fine. But even in isolation, the world has a way of intruding. One winter, a pair of brothers from a nearby township disappeared while hunting. Search parties combed the area for weeks. They found no bodies, no tracks, no signs of struggle. Just a single leather-bound journal placed on a stump facing the tree line, as if waiting to be collected. It wasn't written by the missing men. It was a Holloway record. And the final line on its final page carried a message that chilled the search party to the bone. They heard it. And once you hear it, you belong to it. Authorities dismissed it as backwoods superstition, but the town whispered. People sensed the Holloways weren't merely avoiding civilization. They were defending themselves from something they believed could devour it, something they claimed was waking. As I dug deeper into the archives, the Holloway's fears stopped sounding like superstition and started feeling like testimony, fragments of a truth too large for any single generation to understand. Around the turn of the 20th century, their writing changed again. The entries became shorter, more frantic, as if the clan had less time to think and more reason to act. Some pages weren't written at all, they were carved. Long vertical cuts down the length of the paper, slicing through words as though the writer's hand had been shaking violently. And alongside these gouged journals were drawings, crude sketches of a figure watching from behind trees, always depicted with its head slightly bowed, as if listening to something beneath the ground. The Holloways never gave it a name. They simply called it the Returning, as though it wasn't a creature or a spirit but a cycle, something inevitable, something older than the soil that buried their dead. One of the most disturbing entries came from a woman named Mara Holloway, dated 1912. Her handwriting was steadier than the others, firm and almost elegant. She described hearing what she called the voice in the valley, a low rumble that rose from the earth itself, vibrating through her ribs when she knelt to gather water. She said the elders warned her it was a sign, an omen that the Returning was stirring again, and that their family duty was to keep its hunger quiet. Not satisfied, she followed the sound deeper into the woods. Her final entry was found on a page half torn, half burned. The last written line read, "It isn't coming from beneath us, it is all around." After that date, the clan's population decreased dramatically. Birth records, once meticulously kept, became sparse. The tone of their journals turned grim, almost fatalistic, as though they believed their own blood was thinning, dying out by necessity, not chance. By the 1930s, only a handful of Holloways were left, each described as gaunt, pale, and plagued by night terrors they refused to speak of in daylight. Then the journals stopped mentioning the Returning at all. Not because it was gone, but because the remaining Holloways were preparing for something final, something they had been conditioned for across centuries. A last stand carried out in silence. A decision that would erase them from the map, but not from the land. The Holloways vanished abruptly, almost methodically, as though the entire clan had agreed on a single night to disappear. Local stories claim they migrated west, but there are no travel records, no sightings, no descendants filing new names in distant states. It was as if the earth swallowed them and left not a trace. No graves, no heirlooms, no footprints. But the truth hidden inside that archive tells a darker version, one the outside world was never meant to discover. Their final journals read less like diaries and more like confessions, written as though each sentence carried the weight of a verdict. Their words drip with guilt, not fear. Guilt for what their ancestors kept at bay. Guilt for the silence they forced on their children. Guilt for the knowledge they believed would destroy anyone who heard it. The elders wrote about shadows in the tree line that moved against the wind. They wrote about the air turning metallic at dusk, about doors shaking violently with no one outside, about nights when the valley hummed with a frequency that made their lanterns flicker in unison. They claimed the Returning was no longer a distant threat, but a presence circling closer by the year, drawn not by violence, but by memory. One passage troubled me more than any other. It wasn't signed, and the handwriting didn't match any known member of the clan. It simply said, "There will come a night when the land will call us home. And on that night, we must answer, every Holloway, every generation. Silence is no longer enough." Rumors from nearby towns describe how, in the late 1940s, lights could be seen flickering deep within the Holloway woods, glowing faintly through fog like lanterns moving in a procession. Some claimed to hear low voices chanting in a language they couldn't understand. Others heard nothing at all, just the eerie stillness that settles in a place where something irreversible is about to happen. Then, one morning, the valley was empty. Animals avoided it. Weather patterns shifted above it. Trees leaned inward as if listening to something beneath the soil. And in the center of the clearing where the Holloway homestead once stood, there was nothing except a circle of ash and a single charred journal page half buried in the dirt. Its message was short. "It is done." But it was not enough. That sentence has echoed in my mind ever since. Because the Holloways didn't believe they were saving themselves. They believed they were buying time for all of us. And time, it seems, always runs out. For years I tried to convince myself the Holloways were nothing more than a tragic footnote, a family consumed by their own mythology, a generational echo chamber collapsing under the weight of inherited fear. That's what any rational person would prefer to believe. But the human mind has a strange way of noticing patterns it wasn't meant to see, especially once it's been exposed to something it can't explain away. I started noticing the signs first in their old valley, then far beyond it. A vibration underfoot that wasn't quite sound, a pressure in the air before dusk, like the moment before a storm that never arrives. Birds circling but refusing to land, metallic smells in forests that haven't seen a gun fired in decades, details subtle enough to dismiss, yet familiar enough to feel like déjà vu. Then came the voices, not loud, never loud, more like whispers at the edge of waking, murmurs that vanish the moment you sit up in bed. But they feel directional, like something calling from a particular place, a particular depth, and every time you turn toward the sound, the room feels colder, heavier, more aware of you than you are of it. I thought it was stress, overwork, but the more I read from the Holloway archive, the more the world around me changed. Not visually, nothing that would make me question my sanity, but atmospherically, like the fabric of the land itself was shifting, aligning with something ancient and unfinished. It's around that point in their writings, the years after the clan vanished, that one final pattern begins to reveal itself. Notes scribbled in margins, symbols etched into corners, descriptions of places far from their valley where the same signs were appearing, deserts where compasses spun, swamps humming at night, plains where cattle moved in synchronized patterns, as if responding to an unheard command. The Holloways believed the returning wasn't confined to their land. They believed it was spreading. And here's the part that unsettles me the most. The last few surviving records indicate they knew they were losing. They wrote about something waking beneath America, something that doesn't care about borders, towns, names, or history, something old enough to forget us and powerful enough to remember what came before. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Because if the Holloways were right in a way, it is your bloodline, and mine, and everyone's who ever lived on this soil. The deeper I went into the archive, the more I realized the Holloways hadn't disappeared. They had transformed their silence into a map. Not a literal one, not something with coordinates or landmarks, but a pattern woven through their final words, a rhythm. A sequence. A warning placed so quietly between the lines that no casual reader would ever detect it. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The pattern appears every time the clan writes about sound. A knock that echoes twice. A hum that rises, then falls. A whisper heard only when you're alone. A tremor in the ground that pulses 3 times, then stops. These weren't just superstitions. They were signals, reminders of what the Holloways spent generations trying to keep dormant. One journal from the late 1930s describes a night when the entire valley sang. Not melodically, but with a low, vibrating resonance that made lantern flames stretch sideways and shadows peel away from the walls like wet paper. The writer described hearing footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy, and he wrote that each step sounded like it was coming from more than one direction at once. He said the children cried without making a sound. Another record mentions that the returning could never be seen directly. Only its influence could, like heat rising off asphalt, like the shimmer in the corner of your eye when you're certain someone is standing behind you, even though you swear the room is empty. The Holloways believe this presence didn't travel through space the way we understand it. It traveled through memory, through the emotion left behind in a place after centuries of lives, deaths, violence, and soil soaked with stories nobody recorded. That's why they stayed in the valley. Not because they were trapped. Because they were the only ones who could recognize the signs. The only ones who knew what it meant when the woods went silent, or when the air tasted metallic, or when shadows grew darker in one corner of the room than the rest. They believed the returning fed on attention, on fear, on the gaps between what we understand and what we refuse to see. And now, as I speak these words aloud, I can't help but wonder whether I've already said too much. Whether you, listening, have already become part of the pattern simply by hearing it. Because the Holloways wrote one final truth, one they repeated again and again in their last surviving pages. The returning cannot be fought, only delayed, and delays, no matter how long, always end. There's one last part of the archive I haven't told you about. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I needed to be sure you were willing to hear it. Most people would have stopped listening long before now. Most people turn away from truths that threaten the foundation of their world. But you're still here, and that means you're ready for what the Holloways left behind in their final message. A message not meant for their descendants, because they knew they would have none. It was meant for whoever uncovered their story next, for us. Near the bottom of the box, wrapped in cloth so old it crumbled at my touch, was a single page sealed in wax, not written in ink, but scorched, as though each word had been branded into the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, careful, measured, almost ceremonial. It didn't tell a story. It didn't describe a sighting or a ritual or a piece of lore. It was a directive, a set of instructions. The Holloways believed that every few generations, the returning searched for a new place to root itself. A new valley, a new home, a new wound in the land deep enough to hold it. They believed that if the wrong person discovered the truth, the returning would find them. Not physically, but through awareness, through curiosity, through the act of paying attention. The returning follows the listener, the page warned, not the believer, not the witness, the listener, the one who hears the story. At first, that seemed like metaphor, an old family's way of keeping outsiders away. But then I remembered something. The Holloways didn't try to warn the world. They hid everything, buried everything, erased themselves rather than risk speaking the truth aloud. They didn't fear the returning coming for them. They feared it spreading through those who heard its name. As I read the final lines of that scorched page, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, but from recognition, because I had felt the signs long before I found the archive. And whether you realize it or not, if you felt a shift in the room around you while listening, a pressure behind the ribs, a stillness that wasn't there before, that's not coincidence. The Holloways wrote one last thing at the bottom of the page, a sentence so simple it felt like a whisper pressed into my ear. One, you know its story, it knows you, and now you know it. Whether you choose to forget it, deny it, or carry it with you, the Holloways believe the returning always finds the ones who listen the longest. So before this ends, ask yourself one question: how closely have you been listening?